honoring the 125-year anniversary of the Kansas City Parks Department. I want to mention a couple of upcoming programs. We've got our new calendar out, our June 2019 calendar. We have some great programs coming up. On June 6th, appropriately enough, we'll be having a program on D-Day, part of our ongoing partnership with the Command School of the History Department at the Command and General Staff College at Fort Leavenworth, and that should be great. Donna Stein will be here at the Plaza Library on June 10th with Scenes from the Heartland, which is her new book of stories that are based on Thomas Hart Benton's lithographs and paintings. On June 11th, also here at Plaza, the next day, the very next day, we have Victor Boutros, who is the founding director and CEO of the Virginia-based Human Trafficking Institute. Will be talking about human trafficking, today's slavery, which I think is an enormously important topic for us in Kansas City because, believe it or not, and it's hard for us to believe here near the Country Club Plaza that this is going on, but we're actually a central transit point for human trafficking in the United States here in Kansas City. And then speaking of public policy, you'll have a chance to ask questions after you hear tonight about the importance of parks and boulevards. You should come on June 12th, also here at the Plaza, to hear our two candidates for mayor, Jolie Justice and Quentin Lucas, talk about their vision for the future, and you should ask them some tough questions about what they're going to do about parks and boulevards. And the last two that I want to mention are very important personally to me. There's been some controversy about Shakespeare in the Park this summer because they're not doing actual Shakespeare, right? They're doing Tom Stoppard's play, originally based on Tom Stoppard's movie, Shakespeare in Love. They're doing the play of Shakespeare in Love. And I have a piece of trivia for you that you can win bar bets all over town on. The first two books written about Tom Stoppard, our greatest living playwright, were written by two UMKC professors simultaneously, but without each other knowing that they were doing it. Felicia Landre wrote one, and Joan Dean wrote the other. And we will have Joan Dean talking about Tom Stoppard in Love on June 19th to tell us all about that. And then last but not least, Barry Strauss will be back for the 5th time in the Kansas City Public Library. He's one of our greatest classical scholars, professor at Cornell, and a great translator of the classics into contemporary idiom. And his book, 10 Caesars, Roman Emperors from Augustus to Constantine, which has been very well reviewed. He'll be here on June 20th. So that's what's upcoming. But tonight, we have a very special night. As I said, we're celebrating the 125th anniversary of what is one of the greatest parks and boulevard systems in the world. Who in Europe or in America, for that matter, knows that Kansas City is one of the loveliest cities on earth? So said André Maurois, member of the French Academy, biographer of Proust and Victor Hugo, and briefly, during World War II, a resident of Kansas City. Yes, we were the Paris of the Plains, but before that, under the leadership of August Meyer and George Kessler, we were the City Beautiful. Now, my job tonight is to introduce our next speaker, actually, and I want you to take a look at this picture. I'm sorry I don't have it up here. This is August Meyer. Just remember that when our next speaker comes out. Thank you. So August Meyer and George Kessler were at the origin of the City Beautiful movement. Parks and boulevards, curvilinear streets and fountains, public amenities and private aspirations to turn a dense, sooty, farm and ranch animal-friendly urban hodgepodge into a suburban garden. The genius of Meyer and Kessler and William Rockhill Nelson, and ultimately J.C. Nichols, was to recognize that a great city, a great and beautiful city, needs to integrate public and private spaces. The Paseo, Case and West Terrace Park, Cliff Drive, Hyde Park, ultimately the Plaza, becoming what the chief historian of the movement calls mellow symmetry. I love that phrase. What is now That, by the way, what you're hearing is a tornado warning. And I will just say to you that this is probably the safest place you could be because we're essentially underground here. So if you hear any more of those sounds, don't worry. The last time we heard one was actually when we had the architects at BNIM who were redoing Greensburg, Kansas, which had been destroyed by a tornado, creating a green city there. I think, Bob Berkebile, are you here tonight? Yeah, there he is. In the middle of their presentation of how they were rebuilding this town destroyed by a tornado, we had a tornado warning then. And everybody stayed, nobody died. So, just saying. So where was I? The genius of Meyer and Kessler not only brought us the apotheosis of the city beautiful suburbanism, but also the foundation of what we now call the new urbanism, an integration of car and pedestrian, shops, offices, various kinds of not too dense housing with park features and actual parks in walking distance, all of which, if we weren't having a tornado, you could see out these windows. In 1911, the Parks Department issued a report, and I love this quote in William Wilson's great book on the City Beautiful movement in Kansas City. Kansas City will have completed the first 20 years of the history of its efforts to attain the City Beautiful. The persistency of purpose which has brought this plan to fruition is one of the most remarkable instances of continuity of purpose in city planning that can be found in the history of American municipalities. Persistence of purpose. But my real purpose here tonight is to introduce Pete Brown, who will introduce Susan Rademacher. Pete is the president of Kissick Construction. Every hole in Kansas City that is not a pothole was dug by Pete. If we could convince him to take the dirt that he and his team have dug from his holes and put them in those potholes, we would immensely improve our city. Pete finds many other ways to improve our city. He's been involved with the Nelson and the library. He's a great friend of the library. He helped us in our campaign for the levy increase. He's been so involved with the restoration and renaissance of the Folly Theater that it is sometimes known as Pete's Folly. But more to tonight's point, he's been a mainstay of the Roanoke Parks Conservancy. That's probably where all the dirt went. And indeed, he and his wife Julie were model neighbors of mine when I lived in Roanoke, which is probably why I was forced to leave. But really, he's here because he represents that persistence of purpose and devotion to cultural beauties that we need a lot more of in our parks and boulevard world. Pete Brown.
Thank you. I'll leave my business cards in back for any excavations or civil work anybody needs done. That is my chief salesman right there. This evening's presentation continues our Making a Great City series, focusing on the past, present, and future of our parks and boulevards in Kansas City. As we wrap up this lecture series with our wonderful presenter this evening, I would like to first pause and acknowledge those that have made it all possible. The Penn Valley Park Conservancy and the Roanoke Park Conservancy, along with their fabulous partnership with the Kansas City Library and the Kansas City Parks Department. Thank you very much, Director Kemper and Director Reinhard, and your strong staff members for your partnership in making this a success. These three lectures have been generously underwritten by the American Society of Landscape Architects Prairie Gateway Chapter, Gould Evans, J.E. Dunn Construction, the Kessler Society, Kissick Construction, Midtown KC Now, Phronesis, and the Urias Family Foundation. Thank you very much for your commitment. And finally, thank you. And finally, I especially thank the committee that has worked tirelessly over the last 8+ months organizing and arranging these speakers. Donna Boley, Lance Klein, and Kurt Watkins. We very much appreciate you. As all of us contemplate what our neighborhood parks mean in a broader context, we're reminded that public spaces make cities work. and that our collective effort does make a difference. So thank you to all that are assembled here tonight for your commitment to the community. This Making a Great City lecture series has exceeded our expectations with the quality of the presentations and the depth of discussions it subsequently generated in the community. You may recall that in March we reached back in the past with Kurt Culberson, principal of the design firm Design Workshop in Aspen, Colorado, about the history of George Kessler work and the importance of his concept in Kansas City's green framework. In April, we gained wonderful insight about the president from Leon Younger, president of Pro Consulting in Indianapolis, Indiana, as he walked us through a detailed assessment of Kansas City's current parks and boulevard system, insightful comparisons to peer cities, as well as an overall national trends for park systems. Well, this evening, we look to the future for examples of what other cities have done to support their parks and boulevard systems through partnerships and private entities, and to optimize a park system's assets to the resources available. For this, I'm very pleased to introduce Susan Rademacher, a trailblazer in the Park Conservancy movement, as well as a thought leader for considering how to best activate and benefit from our shared public spaces. Ms. Rademacher currently is the Parks Curator for the Pittsburgh Parks Conservancy. In her role, she preserves, enhances, and promotes the cultural significance of the Pittsburgh Parks, including master planning, capital project design, community engagement, historic research, and articulating the value of parks to support their preservation. Previously, Ms. Rademacher served as the founding executive director and president of the Louisville Olmstead Parks Conservancy, where she worked to restore and preserve parks and public spaces in Louisville, Kentucky. She produced a nationally renowned master plan for the city's system of 18 Olmstead parks and 6 parkways. She served as the assistant director of Louisville's Metro Parks Department, where she established the planning and design division, as well as project manager for the Mayor's Committee on Public Art for Louisville's Metro government. Rademacher was a Lowe Fellow at Harvard University's Graduate School of Design and is a graduate of Miami University. She is a published author and served as editor-in-chief of Landscape Architecture magazine, as well as a founder of Garden Design magazine. Ms. Rademacher has made presentations to the American Planning Association, the American Society of Landscape Architects, the International Urban Parks Congress, the National Trust for Historic Preservation, the Project for Public Spaces, the Smithsonian Institution, and the Urban Land Institute. In 2015, Rademacher was named an honorary member of the American Society of Landscape Architects. And this honor is bestowed on individuals whose achievements of national or international significance or influence have provided notable service to the profession of landscape architecture. She was honored for her role with the Parks Conservancy while working closely with landscape architects to preserve and rehabilitate the legacy of Pittsburgh parks. In congratulating her on the award, I especially enjoyed a quote from Pittsburgh Parks Conservancy's CEO, Meg Cheever. She remarked, "Susan Rademacher's dedication to the design and restoration of our city parks has made her an asset to our entire region, helping bring national and international recognition to Pittsburgh's beautiful green spaces. This prestigious honor is well deserved." Personally, I appreciated the CEO's remark of Ms. Rademacher's dedication to the design and restoration of our city parks, because we here in Kansas City have a real gem in our parks and boulevard system, and we're fortunate to have dedicated civic leaders who believe in the importance of public spaces. So I'm very excited to hear what our wonderful speaker has to share with us this evening. And breaking news, stop the presses. Susan also, just this week, was awarded the National Award from the National Association of Olmstead Parks. So we're in for a real treat tonight. Please join me in welcoming Ms. Susan Rademacher.
Good evening. Thank you, Pete. I all of those wonderful things that I've gotten to be part of are wonderful things that involve probably hundreds of people. So just know that that's really going to be a lot of what I talk about tonight, is the complex systems and the collaborative relationships that are necessary if you're going to nurture a citywide park system. I first came to Kansas City when I was in college in a pep band. Our basketball team from Hanover College was playing in some national finals here. We drove all night. We rolled into town on a Sunday morning at about 6 a.m., something like that, and things were blowing through the streets, and it was to me the epitome of the blues. And I had no idea, first of all, that I would spend my career in landscape architecture and parks. And I had no idea of the fabulous city that was around me. In the years since then, I've really been fortunate to be part of this wonderful world of park making and park preserving. Immersion in your story of your remarkable Kessler system has been a real delight for me over the last couple months. I had a chance to do some reading thanks to kind people who sent me lots of background material. And as I was reading, I found myself reflecting a lot on systems and conservancies that look at systems. And that's quite a different animal than a conservancy that looks at one park. So I'm going to talk about that tonight, and I'm going to tell you about my view of what makes conservancies successful and what the challenges are, as I take you through some of the work that demonstrates the partnerships, both in Louisville and in Pittsburgh, that I've been involved with. But before that, I would like to thank the library for its community leadership in hosting this forum, Director Kemper, and to Terry Reinard and the Parks Department. A big thanks for, first of all, spending time talking with me about the challenges and the opportunities, and for running such a fine park system. Also, the Penn Valley Conservancy, especially Donna Boley, who also helped me a great deal in preparing, and the Roanoke Park Conservancy with Lance Klein. So thank you all very much. I would not be able to recognize the amazing affinities and parallel stories that might shed some light for you without these inputs and this level of support from your institutions and your leadership. So with that, let me get started. So as I was reading through everything, I found such a wonderful story of aspiration and big vision, and a commitment to execute that vision at a very high level, and a dawning recommitment in the community, I think, that may have begun with the Kessler Society, I'm not sure, but of raising awareness and understanding of the value of this system some maybe a generation ago. That it started. This photograph of Swope Park I like because it's so dreamy. And what I gleaned from the conversations and the readings are that these are some of the goals that Kansas Cityans have, especially leadership looking at parks, for what the Parks and Boulevard system could do. So there's a real emphasis on continuing to shape the city, which of course was the origin story. To have the adequate resources to make it excellent is paramount, because it's the everyday management decisions that really affect the quality of park experience for people. Instilling pride and joy, of course, connecting people to nature. And that's really, I think you probably are all quite aware of the multiple amazing benefits of spending more time in nature alone and with other people. Improving public health. I'll talk a little bit more about that. A remarkably critically important role of the park and boulevard infrastructure system. Strengthening communities, and that's through identity, but also through pulling people together in efforts like this, in hands-on volunteer work, and all kinds of partnerships that we'll talk about as well. sustaining resilient ecological systems. There is no, natural system in a sense in our parks and boulevards, but there is an ecological system at work everywhere. We're part of it, and we need to understand that, and that needs to be equally important to the cultural restoration work. And then attracting ongoing investment, which is the key. So just to take a step back, and I was asked to talk about conservancies. So to conserve, from the Latin, to keep together. And clearly it's two different things. It's environmentally important and culturally important. Protecting from harm or destruction. But that's really only the first step, because it's much more than protecting from harm or destruction. There is an advancing the idea of these parks, the value of these parks, not simply protecting and preserving them, that I think is what the modern city wants and needs. So it takes a system of human beings to manage a system of parks. The systems are very complicated. I often think of the old Star Trek multidimensional chess game, which I never tried to play, but it's very much what we do every day, is trying to keep in mind the full 360 degrees of all of the aspects of the physical park, the projects, the communities, the business opportunities, and I've just called them these biological, political, social, and economic as a shorthand for the many, many things that are represented there. And it is complicated, but it's super, super important to understand that all of these systems are at work all the time, for good or for bad. And we have to understand how they work in order to be able to respect them. And whether it's a social system that we're respecting in a neighborhood where there is a key neighborhood leader that everybody looks to, and if you don't pay attention to that neighborhood leader, you're sunk. That's a common situation. To the dynamics of a changing landscape. The interdependency of all of those systems. So a social system in a park has an interdependency with a political system, with people's own experience. So just thinking in terms of how these things overlap is the fascinating and frustrating aspect of working in parks. It's what keeps it really interesting and never routine. Engagement is the critical thing. Looking for these partners across the entire spectrum, especially in the nooks and crannies where you wouldn't think there might be an affinity to parks and boulevards. If the park system is in fact complex and it represents the entire culture of the city, then of course you're going to have partners at every level. And sometimes, just as with donors, the smallest kind of partnership can make a really huge difference in terms of building your public trust and credibility of a conservancy organization over time. And then nurturing, moving things forward. How do we advance these parks and boulevards? We need to understand their ecology and how to make them function more effectively for our changing climate. We need to understand changing recreational needs, but at the same time, we have to understand the fundamental design framework of a particular park or boulevard landscape so that we know where is it appropriate to insert a new use or accommodate a new use. Usually the framework tells you itself because the planners, and Kessler was every bit as much of a visionary as Frederick Law Olmsted was in understanding the full range of needs that a community has from its parks. So recreation, and forgive me if this is familiar to you, but I think it's always good to remember that Frederick Law Olmsted defined recreation in three ways. One was physical recreation, the improvement of the body. One was kind of spiritual or mental recreation, the recreation, the nurturing, the healing of your spirit and your thought processes. And then the third was social recreation, the need to see and be seen, to gather, to celebrate, to have big civic events in parks. And so So parks and boulevard systems really need to meet all of those needs in various ways across the whole system, avoiding duplication where you can avoid it. And the wonderful thing about a park system, especially in an interesting topography, as you have here in Kansas City, is that the park components and the boulevard components have really distinct characters that you can build on. And then advocacy and funding. Advocacy and funding really go together, and that's another point that I will continue to touch on, is that it's really important to have that broad community support, involvement, understanding, challenge sometimes, in order to be successful with the advocacy and funding. You've got to have that level of support, which means you've got to have a long-term relationship with people. And you also have to understand how, again, those other systems, political systems, respond to their constituents and what their constituents want. And sometimes the challenge for a conservancy is inserting into that dialogue what the park wants or what the larger community wants, rather than a very specific special interest. So keeping your eye on all of these things and remembering always what the original design intent was, how it served the city, how that framework continues to serve the city and can be reinvigorated with respect to the framework. So the framework allows you to reinvigorate it because it's such a brilliant framework that George Kessler gave you. Conservancies across the U.S., call them what you will, an alliance, a consortium, partnerships, there are a lot of different terms. There are as many different animals out there as there are cities for conservancies, but there are two sort of basic threads of structure. One is a strong mayoral government, and I've had the experience of working with strong mayors in both of the cities that I have worked in, and with no park commission, no dedicated funding for parks. And of course, you have the politicization of sometimes staff, where people who are not successful in other departments sometimes get sent over to the jobs that people don't want in parks or in sanitation. It happens in different ways. You've got major developers who are pressuring for opportunity, and who are major supporters in political campaigns. You've got a lot of elements that are not rational, and that was the most important early lesson that I learned, is that politics is not rational. And sometimes you can earnestly explain and counter, and what you do is you just make somebody madder and madder if they are cemented to their position. And sometimes elected officials are, or they have other priorities. So I will tell you that I won't name the mayor or the city, but in one case where a university and a major, I'll just say UPS type carrier, developed a new program for their adult employees to get college degrees. And the university was going to build, at the UPS's expense, a dorm. They wanted to build it in one of the Olmstead Parks adjacent to the campus. And in my dual role as a Metro Parks assistant director and the president of the Olmstead Parks Conservancy, it was part of my job and my board's job to be kind of the loyal opposition, in a way, to raise questions behind the scenes with the mayor, with city council members, with foundation leaders, and with business leaders and community leaders, not to be rabble-rousers and ankle-biters. That job is really important, and that's a great job for friends groups, for individual parks, and for community associations. And again, those partnerships are really important, because when you're fighting a battle, you got to fight it on some different fronts. But I went into the mayor's office and I explained to him what the consequences would be, what would be lost, and what he could expect from the park supporters in Louisville. Whoops, I didn't. Anyway, Don't anybody do any research. And I won't deny it, though. The mayor said to me, "You mean after all I've done for those people, they can't do this for me?" So this was a mayor who helped to start the Conservancy and did a tremendous amount. But it comes down to that. And so a Conservancy, one of the main roles is to have the integrity and independence, which means having money, to stand up to that strongly political environment, and you have it in every form of government, but especially in the mayoral. My dream someday is to work with a city manager form of government. I suppose some people could tell me about the nightmares of that, but to my view, the parks systems that I've visited across the country, when they have a city manager form of government, their parks departments are more professionalized. And I think, you've got a good example of that here. Typically, parks conservancies are park-specific across the country, but there have been cases, and the two I'm going to talk about, where conservancies took the bigger picture. And two of the items, equitable access and watershed management, are citywide issues that parks can help address. So what can a conservancy do? First, I'll tell you a little bit about the Louisville story, just quickly going through this. This is a progression from left to right from the 1891 Olmstead Plan, which you can see had 3 distributed large parks, all between 400 and 700, almost 800 acres, and 16 miles of parkway, and just a very few small urban squares that were designed by Frederick Law Olmsted Sr. His firm and his sons worked for the next 50 years, much in the way that Kessler did, to develop this system with additional neighborhood parks and continuing the build out of the large regional parks and the parkways. And then in 1991 is the year that the Olmstead Parks Conservancy was created. And it's important to note that the creation of the Conservancy started with a grassroots organization, the Louisville Friends of Olmstead Parks, who mostly lived near one of the parks in the most affluent neighborhood. They saw what was going on, the loss of institutional memory, the mechanized maintenance, the deferred maintenance, and just kind of benign neglect because of the history of park systems focusing more on recreational programs post-World War II and community centers and that kind of thing. And so the Conservancy formed, and the first thing it did was to commission historic research, very detailed historic research and chronology, and to develop its board, and then they hired me. And so we did our master plan, but when we were doing a strategic plan back in the early 2000s, we went to about 20 community leaders and we said, what could we do today? One of the questions, the last question, what could we do today that would have the same kind of impact on our entire city as the Olmstead Park System had on the city, which very much shaped the city. Parks outside the sort of settled boundaries, streetcar lines, they really, just like Kessler's plan, very much formed the shape of Louisville. And one of our major donors, founder of Humana, medical insurance company, said, wow, we need to build out this system. We have an incredible stream around the outer part of the county. There are pieces of trail that we could create a loop, and we're going to build this outer ring of Olmstead Parks. And it was focused on areas that were rapidly developing with this fairly pristine stream running through it, and the concern that this resource was going to be lost. And so the founders of what became the 21st Century Parks developed the parklands of Floyd's Fork as what they touted as the next Olmstead system, or the the next ring of the Olmstead system. And that has been under development for about 10 years. It's very stunning. It is completely privately managed. When that work started, it was started as a partnership with the Parks Department. The Louisville Olmstead Parks Conservancy was part of it, but it rapidly became clear to the developers that they needed to purchase large tracts of land, which the city was not prepared to do. And over time, as we worked collaboratively on the planning and acquisition, they determined that it would be much more effective for them to just move forward as a private entity managing public parks, and that is what they are. They're completely financially separate from the city. There has been a fluidity between the two boards, and so there's been a coordination of fundraising efforts. And it's really changed the city. It's been a wonderful model, I think, for how you can grow a legacy park system for new meaning. Engaging partners is, as I mentioned, a critical piece of this. Just a few examples of unusual partners. The Olmstead Parks Conservancy in Louisville is celebrating its 30th anniversary this year, so they arranged for an exhibit at the Fraser Museum, which is quite extensive, and it has a lot of interactive elements. Kids get to make their own little Olmstead parks, and people get to bring their photographs and have them become part of the exhibit. There was a lecture series and a 2-day conference that was co-sponsored with the Kentucky ASLA chapter. Lots of panel discussions and tours. So that was a different set of partnerships around the anniversary. We developed a relationship with a botanist, Pat Harrigan, the weed lady, and she wanted to create a herbarium. So we helped her create a herbarium, and out of that grew a beautiful book, a guide to the botanical, the botany of the Louisville Olmstead Parks. Which has become a very popular, another avenue of entry into the assets of the park system. And then the Olmstead Park Nuts, we called them Park Champions when we started. They've been rebranded as Park Nuts, which everybody loves. But that's a very hands-on volunteer program. I think most conservancies really rely on volunteer programs as a way of getting work done, of course, but also of getting people to develop a greater sense of ownership by actually helping to shape the landscape that they work in. Do I need to pause for that? No? Okay. One thing I should have said at the beginning is you all are brave folks, and it takes a lot of bravery to do Parks Conservancy work, so you're in the right place. Promoting character and craft is another important thing that a conservancy can do, I think, much more effectively than a parks department or other public agency. And in Louisville, just 2 examples, the bringing back the rustic bridges, which we actually engineered over steel supports, so those rustic logs are actually placed over steel uprights. It's a very sturdy bridge over a creek that floods a lot. It's been in place for 15 years and still there. But that sort of character element is unique to that park. We wouldn't put that in any other park. And you know that parks departments really favor standardization because they have a lot to take care of. And so it's easier if all the playground parts are the same and all the benches are the same. But the hallmark of our legacy landscapes is character. And character is unique to the place. It's, the indigenous stone that's used. It's the methods. The tapestry brick that you have here in Kansas City is amazing, just as an example of craftsmanship. And then the 2 right-hand pictures show a very important retaining wall on a road that collapsed because of drainage. The road predated the park, it was 130 years old, and the city was going to rebuild it with concrete and fake stone veneer. And I had just been to a lecture by a Scottish stonemason who was setting up a dry stone conservancy in Lexington, Kentucky. And I brought him up to look at it. And the end of the story is we were able to rebuild the wall using dry stone technique. That means the wall sort of lives and breathes. Water can move through it. We also incorporated a training program, so a lot of the people who worked on this are people who are in training to become masons with this expertise. We built the wall for $700,000 less than what the city would have spent. And it's gorgeous, and it's going to last 1,000 years. So, you know, these are things that, with a little ingenuity and willingness to go out on a limb, you can make great progress toward bringing this character back. Taking on transformative projects is really important too. A WPA amphitheater, Iroquois amphitheater, had no roof, and it flooded all the time because it was built on a stream. And so we took that on, we added a roof, we used elements from the original amphitheater design to bring that character out. It's much more functional now, it has good sight lines, a separate concession area, and people, when they hated the idea of it because we essentially demolished everything except the original WPA structure, the sort of stage house. And then when they came to the opening, they all said, "Oh, it's just like I remember. It's so beautiful." So, you know, memories are short. And I'm going to show you a few before and afters because it's just too easy to forget what things were like before you fixed them. So in Iroquois Park, also the Iroquois Overlook. I can't hear that. What do you all say? Keep going? We're brave. And then down below, the parkways, which had degenerated a lot because people found trees to be messy and they had too many cars for their household, so they always parked on the grass. So there was a citywide parkway plan just recently completed to develop a multimodal system. Yes?
Sorry, I really hate to interrupt. I just wanted to let everyone know there is a tornado warning happening in our area, and we're going to have to evacuate the plaza library upstairs, which means people will be coming downstairs. There has been a tornado on the ground near Lawrence, and they're saying it's near I-70, near the Speedway. We're all fine here, and this is exactly where you need to be in the event of a tornado, but I just wanted to let you know you're hearing the noises, and there's going to be other people coming in this area, but just wanted you to be aware of the extreme weather situation. Any questions from anyone? Okay, we'll continue with the program, but just wanted to let you be aware of what was happening. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, you're going to turn that off?
Yeah, we'll see if we can get it turned off. It may not.
Good. All right. Okay. So moving on to Pittsburgh, you can see there's a tremendous resemblance to your landform here in terms of, in our case, it's two rivers converging to form the Ohio, whereas here you have a tributary to the Missouri. But it's a complicated landscape. Even though we're all in one state and it's all one city, people still don't cross the bridges. They still kind of stick to their neighborhood and don't typically know very well the rest of the city. And so the park system, especially as we grow it to be more and more interconnected, becomes an avenue for people to get out, to explore, to learn more about their city and their neighbors. So in Pittsburgh, the story is that our founder, Meg Cheever, lived near a park and walked her dog in it all the time. Again, affluent park. And she wanted to do something about it. So she got some neighbors together and they decided that, like Central Park in New York City, they would form a conservancy. They went to meet with the mayor, Tom Murphy, and he said, that's great, but we have 4 large regional parks, and I would like you to tackle all 4 of them. And so they gulped, and this was their chance, and they said yes. So Meg set about studying other systems and found her way to Louisville, which is how we got acquainted. But the Conservancy in Pittsburgh was quite different than the one in Louisville. It started as an independent organization with no city funding, although the mayor was supportive. There was an operating agreement from the beginning, just as there was in Louisville, but it was quite vague and general. Every project that the Conservancy did had to have a separate agreement with the city.
We're not going to be able to turn that off.
Okay, all right. Apologies, the beeper cannot be turned off. Selective hearing. Anyway, this is just to show how the roles complement each other, and that's the point here, is that a conservancy can be more entrepreneurial, can be more nimble, can be more responsive, and take advantage of opportunities much more quickly than the city can. But the city owns the parks. They are in them every day. They are the ones who are responsible for them. And so understanding, in our case, an array of departments, what their roles and motivations are, and then how do we fit with that in a complementary way is the real key. We've been around now for 22 years. Just a little bit of a summary of what we've done so far. Some of these slides that you'll be seeing are part of a listening tour that we're doing around the community, which is why it says your nonprofit partner in parks. Our basis for projects is finding the right balance between the needs of people, preservation of the historic legacy, and the ecological function. So the reason that the Louisville Master Plan was so recognized was because it was the first time that an ecological approach had been taken to a historic park. And we had two of the leading firms in the country in those different expertises working together, forging kind of a new language for how to do park restoration and rehabilitation. And it was very successful. And it was clear to me, not being a landscape architect, but being a land lover, is that unless the canvas of the parks, the natural systems, the landforms, the water, the trees, were healthy, then what business do we have tinkering with what's sitting upon that system? We had to address the landscape itself and its functioning, because it is inextricable from the experience that people have and the ability to make improvements in parks. So finding the balance between these three things is a hallmark of every project. I'm just going to go very quickly through a series of projects just to give you a sense about the kinds of things that we've done. In the very beginning, the projects were highly visible, small, doable in a relatively short amount of time, and not something that would interfere with long-term master planning. So gatehouses and structures, rehabbing, and you can see the before pictures, visitor center and a rental pavilion, developing a system-wide signage standard, interpretive to wayfinding signs, rules, and regulations to establish an identity for the whole system. And then once the Conservancy had a few of these projects under its belt and had kind of proven the concept, yes, it is a responsible organization. It can deliver projects on time and under budget. It delivers quality. These are places that really burnish the legacy. It was ready to take on this huge project. So in the middle of the University and Cultural District of Oakland in Pittsburgh, where we have the Carnegie Libraries and Museum, we have Carnegie Mellon University, and the University of Pittsburgh, lies Schenley Park, one of our large regional parks. And you can see in this, progression from top to bottom, how it was a ravine, and then there was a national competition which McGonigal, who was someone who worked in your park system, won for creating a new entrance to the park. And then the bottom image, you can see that deteriorated over time and became parking. So the Conservancy recognized the loss of that entrance in its master plan and was able over time, about 5 years, to assemble a team, including a regional sort of chamber of commerce organization. We had state construction money. It was an $11 million project. There was huge objection about the loss of parking. So the strategy was to do a parking study, and what was found was that there were plenty of spaces in all of the parking garages in that immediate vicinity to take the cars that once parked here for free. So that problem went away, and now it's just a really vibrant place with tons of free programming. We have an important revenue positive situation here, which we don't have pretty much anywhere else, because we have 4 food kiosks and a restaurant, full service restaurant, as well as lots of rentals and a wide variety of revenue generating things that I'm sure Leon Unger talked about. But it's a very lively place, and our sort of quiet motto is to keep it weird. It's meant to be ethnic, it's meant to be not, no franchises in the kiosks, local food, Pogo Palooza, all kinds of really fun things go on there. And then after that big success, the Conservancy was then in a position to start working across the scales. And so there were a few smaller park projects. The one that I'm particularly proud of is August Wilson Park, which was formerly called Cliffside Park in the Hill District. And you can see again the before picture, a stunning view of downtown. Nothing had been done in this park since 1975 when it was created. Out of urban renewal. So there had been houses in this area. This is an African American community. It's really the heart of Black culture in Pittsburgh. And the important message here is that this was a 7-year project. We started with a different site, working with the community, and over time it became clear that that site was not going to be successful, and so we worked with the community to find a new site. So we listened to them. They were nervous about what would happen in this location that we were considering, and we took that direction and we shifted to a place where we would have a greater opportunity for success. And then we did, of course, a lot of design workshopping together. It was very aspirational. Not everything is in the park that people wanted, but the park really speaks of culture and kind of a vision of a community that the Hill District once was, and which still exists there, and which people really want to bring back. And so we used windscreen fabric on a basketball court to show vintage photographs by an African-American photographer, Teenie Harris, of the Hill District and of people together outside, having fun, gossiping on a park bench, all kinds of things. And we also chose quotes from each of August Wilson's 10 plays, the Pittsburgh cycle, for which he won the Pulitzer Prize, and he was born a block away from this park. His house is now an artist colony, and they and we are in partnership together, along with the neighborhood organizations. Another project, Mellon Park Walled Garden, was a historic estate, and this project was about how do you take an estate garden and make it a public garden. It had languished for about 40 years, and so by day, it's very similar to the historic garden that we can see in photographs. By night, it now hosts a new public artwork, and the donors who approached us about restoring this garden wanted to put in a sculpture to commemorate their daughter. And over time, we worked with them to explain that the garden itself was a work of art, and that it would be fine to bring in another work of art, but it needed to not compete. It needed to have its own separate sort of life. And the artist developed an installation of lights, 150 fiber optic lights in the lawn that are in the pattern of the night sky on the day of Annie's birth. So, I mean, it's a beautiful thing. It's very romantic and special. And it's become a place where people really respect it. They don't bring their dogs into it. Babies crawl around on the grass. There's Wi-Fi. It's just a quiet, lovely transformation. The Westinghouse Memorial is one where we took a historic memorial, and you can see the before picture when the pond failed. And what we did was we took the stream water that comes through the ravine up above that memorial monument, and we used that as the source of water for the pond. Before, it had been fed by drinking water, which we think is reprehensible. And so that's been a lot of our work in fountains and other things, is making sure that we're not flowing through into the storm sewer system as they have traditionally, but we're recirculating, we're filtering naturally, or we're using stormwater as our supply. Oops. Then the Frick Environmental Center is another major project on the scale of Schenley Plaza. This is a $19 million project, our largest to date, and it replaced a structure from the 70s, which was used for environmental education. You can see there where it was burned out, a burned out structure. The important thing here is that it also, it was an integrated process where the contractor was part of our design team from almost the beginning. We had an artist on our design team from the beginning. We had all kinds of engineers and landscape architects, and our goal was to create a living building, and so we did. And that means that the building is net zero energy, net zero water, so it's a building that really expresses the values of that the environmental education is focused on. And the artist developed a lovely feature as part of the building in which the roof collects rainwater, and during a rainstorm it flows over the edge of the roof as a rain veil along a glass-walled gallery, and then it goes down a series of channels into an amphitheater area where it replicates the topography of the stream valley. Also at the Environmental Center, another partnership that's interesting is the one that we have with the Smithsonian affiliate, the Heinz History Center. Sam Black there is the curator at the Heinz History Center, who created a 10-year exhibit called From Slavery to Freedom. And he was searching all over town for a place to put a garden that would have the plants in it that freedom seekers relied on in their flight to freedom. And so we got to talking and figured out that the Environmental Center would be a wonderful place to host this, because we wanted to do a produce garden there. So this partnership is great because there are ongoing problems, there are ongoing programs. There's a film series. There is a partnership with the Hunt Botanical Library. So we have 50 beautiful botanical prints of the plants that are listed in Sam's research. We have an interior gallery, so we can rotate those prints through. We developed an event called A Seat at the Table, which we've done now for 2 years. It involves both sort of a community-wide picnic, but also celebrity chefs. Primarily chefs of color, and they are cooking with the plants and traditions that are shown in the From Slavery to Freedom garden. And in our woods area, this is a 115-acre campus that we have for the Environmental Center, we also have kind of a trail that has the plants in that location, in their natural locations. Okay. We're doing good. We're doing good. The really cool thing about the Environmental Center, apart from it being the only or the first free public living building in the world, number 7 in the world, certified by this institute after a year of performing with lots of metrics. The really important thing is the amount of reach that it has given us. We knew we wanted to build it as a portal to the park, not as an object in and of itself, but it had to be functional. We realized that after the fire, the city's 2 educators who were working at the city's old nature center were really just serving the immediate neighborhood, which was affluent and white. And just within a couple of blocks are two neighborhoods that are, one is very diverse and one is primarily African American, and you never see people from those neighborhoods, or rarely, in the park. So we opened in 2015 is when we opened the Environmental Center. In 2009, you can see there was just a minuscule number. I think there were 2 or 3 schools involved. Now we have over 50 partnerships, both with charter schools, with the public school system, and with private schools. We have programs from age 3 to infinity, very targeted to curricula. And what's really important is that people can come to our programs and they can see people who look like them. And that's what it's really about. We're not going to make the kind of progress that we want in terms of delivering the park experience and the park benefits to everybody in our cities unless you can see yourself reflected there. And that's both by the people that you see and by seeing that your needs are met. So I'm going to end with this bit here. For the last year, since we've had a new parks director and an initiative to become even more active citywide in parks, we have been studying the whole system. You know, we've worked on 22 sites that were active, but there are 165 parks in our system, and 5 of those are large regional parks. Most of them are small neighborhood parks with a smattering of mid-sized parks. So what we have been wanting to do for quite some time is sort of building up out of each one of these project experiences is a real commitment to delivering this equitable park system and having an investment strategy that is based on real information. So we have a very strong partnership with the city in this particular effort, with the mayor's office and with department directors, with these shared goals. And for the first year, in 2018, we did a very exhaustive condition analysis of all of those parks. We defined what they were, we looked at all kinds of aspects of them. And then this year, we've been doing, so that's the hard data. This year, we've been gathering data from people through this Parks Listening Tour that has gone out to every neighborhood in the city. We've had over 130 engagements, and we've done a citywide survey as well. And this summer, we'll be coming back to these communities, larger meetings set around the city, to unveil a draft strategy that combines people's wants with conditions. And so this was just a slide that we show, you know, the distribution of our park system and the different types of parks across the bottom. We spent a lot of time defining what quality is, and 4 different levels of quality. But, you know, what you can see here is repairing disrepair, modernization, and timely maintenance, because the deferred maintenance is a huge burden on everybody. So the process, as I mentioned, is the data plus the public input to develop this investment strategy. One of the first things we did was we looked at a few other cities that have been doing work on equity, New York, Philadelphia, and Minneapolis, where our parks director came from, so we had a leg up there. None of those really fit us perfectly, but we took things from each. We also looked back at all of the sort of city plans over the last maybe 10 years. Not all of the plans, but these across the bottom, and identified the key recommendations out of each plan. And it was, equity was the #1 item in all of the plans. You can see every single plan mentioned equity, followed closely by children, water, air quality, and community. So when we looked at the conditions of the parks, we basically, you know, came up with most of them are good or fair. We looked at then which ones needed what kind of treatment. the definitions of the levels of quality on the left, and then the types of treatments on the right. Again, trying to structure this in a way that's simple to understand and straightforward. We looked at the walk sheds for every park, and again, like Kansas City, our topography, I think it's actually a lot more challenging than yours, but you can't just take a park, put a circle around it, and say this is the 10-minute walk shed, because of the hills, the valleys, the ravines, the lack of entrances. So each one of these specific neighborhoods, colored in a different color, has a different demographic, and different opportunities to use that park. So we did this for every single park. And then we developed the approach, and this is, I'll take a minute to let you look at this. The site need we talked about first, which parks are in the poorest condition and have the greatest need, because this is really going to be about distributing the assets not equally across the system, but targeting them where the need is the greatest. And then we looked at 4 major factors to help us decide where to target the need: people, community, environment, and health. And so people, race, poverty, youth, and seniors were the key metrics there. On community, vacancy and violent crime were the metrics that we chose there. Environment, tree canopy, black carbon, and sewer shed priority, because we are under a consent decree and we have priority sewer sheds, sewer sheds / watersheds that our water authority is focused on, and all of those have major parks in them. And then health, asthma, obesity, diabetes, anxiety, and depression. So when we look at all of that information, as we're crunching all this data, those will be the lenses by which we arrive at the strategy. So I can't tell you what the answer is yet, but we feel confident that we have a good method and that people are extremely excited and supportive of this. Our goal is to, if all goes well through the summer, to mount a referendum for a tax, a new tax, property tax, either a $0.25 or a $0.5 to generate money for the neighborhood and community parks. The regional parks have a little bit of dedicated capital and maintenance funding from a regional asset district. It's a multi-county district that collects taxes on entertainment, and those taxes then go into things like the library, the opera, children's programs, parks. So for the parks have to be over 200 acres. That is the only dependable source of money there is for the city parks. Everything else is subject to the general fund, and Pittsburgh has had some severe financial problems. We've climbed out of them, but it's a city with a lot of needs. So this last bit here is just focused on kind of the heart of the work, key lessons to take away, to think about. Some of these will resonate with you in different ways. The team, so that little heart is a lot of my coworkers and I. One day when we were doing a workshop, but it's a great team of people, and I think people that work in parks generally are fantastic people, whether you're community leaders or park professionals or elected officials. But talented team and diverse team. The expertise that a Parks Conservancy can bring has got to be equal or better than what the city government can provide. Expertise in history, in education, in fundraising. I mean, the whole gamut, the volunteerism, all of these things are full-time jobs that require full-time attention. And our city government doesn't have the capacity to do all of that and to sustain it without seizing. And a conservancy can do that if it stays very focused. So focusing on the community from the beginning and understanding that community relationship doesn't end. It doesn't start with a project and end with the ribbon cutting. It has to start before the project, so there's a relationship and there's some trust and you understand something about who they are. They understand something about who you are. We don't go to work in any park unless we're invited by the community. So it's really important to us that the community sees us as a partner and a technical assistant, if you will. So from the beginning, long-term engagement, you don't walk away from people because a grant ended. Because when you do that, you've lost all of the ground that you've gained. Involving the community in decision-making from the beginning. What project should we do? We have a master plan. You know, what is going to make the biggest transformational difference in your community? Those are important conversations to be had. And then I mentioned the importance of a very excellent survey of, and I think you probably have that here, historical and cultural assets, the natural areas, and the master plan is that firm, long-term basis for renewal. But it's really important to promote a master plan as a vision plan, not as something that is completely unchangeable. Just recently, we took a 15-year-old master plan that had not been implemented. It was developed by another organization, and we did what we called an action plan, which looked at some major changes in the community since the original master plan was done. It looked at the relationship between the park and the surrounding business district and neighborhoods, which the master plan had not done. It looked at changes in transportation, changes in stormwater management issues. But the vast majority of what had been done in the original plan remained intact. What we simply did was to then account for that larger context and the community's role. And it was very successful, and we've just finished our first project on that and are moving forward to the next project. So the getting it done is something that is often the cause of a lot of conflict in an organization, because there's a real desire to show that you can actually get something done when you're first starting out, and yet you don't know what to do. You're not sure. I mean, I agonized a lot in Louisville over proposals to do things that I knew we didn't know enough yet to take those on. And so it's just very critical to make those early showcase projects that you're very confident in and that aren't going to have a negative impact down the road on other plans. Demanding quality of yourself and your partners, doing it well. I mean, the founders of our park systems built to last. They were creating not just a legacy, but they were creating serious infrastructure for the city. And we need to do the same thing with every project that we do. It's not okay to use second-rate materials. It's not okay to ignore it's not okay to ignore the tradecraft and the traditional materials, or the new technology that can help you sometimes attain the result that you're looking for. It's the flexibility in developing a plan and developing a project is really important. And you can't be confidently flexible unless you know what the values of the plan are, what it is that is essential and timeless in your system that is to be protected and that does continue to provide a relevant framework, and then what needs to be addressed that doesn't. Incorporating volunteers is critical, as I mentioned before. Expecting improvement to be incremental, sometimes starting, say, at the perimeter and working your way in, or doing all the signage, or starting in one area of the woodlands that's the most pristine, preserving that, protecting that, making that healthy, and working your way out. That kind of understanding of the incrementalism, because I don't believe that we can go through and do wholesale, massive kinds of public works to remake or update our parks in the way that people may have back then. Our world is much more complicated. There are many more players. There are additional complexities, and it's you learn by doing. So if you make yourself focus and you take these incremental steps and you build and build and build, you're going to learn with every step and then you're going to get better. So I think it's really important to have that kind of discipline. And then staying on target, the board is critical. When the Olmstead Parks Conservancy was first forming in Louisville, Betsy Barlow Rogers, who was the founder of the Central Park Conservancy, came and spoke. And she did this around the country quite regularly. And what she said to the Friends group was, your board can't do this job. You need a different kind of a board to be a citywide conservancy. That board has got to be seen as civic leadership. They have to be able to raise serious money or provide serious talent. And so that was taken at face value, and I think that is a hallmark of successful conservancies. Understanding that government happens at all levels, so it's not just your council person or your mayor, it's your state representative, your state senator, your federal representative and senator. There are other political structures as well that are important, such as quasi-governmental organizations like school boards and sewer authorities. Praising your partners publicly, this is like the fundamental lesson that comes back to bite you every time, because city governments are very sensitive. They work very hard with very little, sometimes biding their time until there's an opportunity to do the thing that they want to do. But it's sort of like your parents, you know, when you become an adult and you realize your parents did the best they could, and you don't blame them anymore, or most of us don't. It's kind of like that with government. They're doing the best they can, and in some avenues, they're doing spectacularly. In others, they just can't. But praising them for what they have done, for their commitment, their dedication, staying the course, for what they do on every project, whether it's in kind or just supportive, is really important. And making sure that reporters know how important it is to you that they mention. Because a lot of times it comes back to you in the form of a news article where they just forgot to mention the city's role. And that's not a good thing. So permitting the partnership to evolve is another really important thing. You start out with a conservancy in certain conditions. Those conditions change. A mayor changes. A city manager changes. There's a natural disaster. There's, you know, huge demographic changes, whatever they are. Climate changes. You have to let the partnership evolve, and there has to be a bit of flexibility and a willingness to step back and review on a regular basis. How is this relationship going? Do we need to adjust it in some way? Concentrate on raising money, of course. One of the things, this is Mellon Square in downtown Pittsburgh, which we took on. This was an $11 million project with a parking garage underneath and integrated retail. We took on the restoration of Mellon Square, and this was the first time, I think, that the Conservancy established a maintenance endowment for a project. So the previous projects that were done did not have, for the most part, maintenance endowments. It's super important to have not only maintenance planning, but the funding there to make sure that if some special expertise is needed, some replacement park, something that the city can't come through with, that you've got some reserves, and that also you've got very clearly spelled out what your organization is doing in terms of long-term maintenance management and what the city is doing. Oftentimes, even though you have an agreement like that, the city ends up not being able to do what they said they're going to do, and you have to be prepared for that. So, again, hold people to the standard and to their commitment, but understand that a conservancy's job is to be the steady kind of institutional memory and forward propulsion, and to keep things on a big picture track, moving forward, continuing to envision a better city, and being as inclusive as possible of all the disciplines in that city and all the people. So the endowment fund has now become part and parcel of all of our new projects, and we're not really encountering a lot of difficulty in raising those funds. We base them on a kind of pro forma budget that we do, very detailed analysis of what we would do annually, on an annual basis, what we might do more periodically, the hours that go into that, the capital equipment, and so forth. And then we figure out how much money we need to generate off of a principal in an endowment, and that sets our target for the endowment. And then keep that laser-like focus, and finally, never give up. They're counting on us. So I always want to make sure to credit design firms. These are, I think, most of the design firms that I have worked with that are represented in the images, the project images that you've seen. There are local firms and national firms. Oftentimes, we like to partner a local firm with a national firm so that we've got the boots on the ground, we've got learning going on, and we're building our own capacity locally, but we like to bring in the ideas, the expertise, the experience from other places. So getting a good mix of local, national design talent is, I think, very valuable. And then just to thank you. You've been brave and patient, and I hope that you remember a little bit of this, that something really resonated, and I think we might have a little time to talk.
Thank you, Susan.
Thank you.
You also have been brave and patient. These are challenges that we don't normally throw at our speakers.
This is a first for me, and my husband was very worried about the weather. He said, "Don't you think you should cancel the lecture?" I said, "No, these people live with tornadoes all the time."
Just FYI, we're all clear now. Things were still churning to the north. I'm guessing we may have gotten to the time when it's through there, but if you're heading north in particular is where you all would want to be taking care. I do think we probably have time for just a limited number of questions, maybe a couple or three.
Oh, okay. When I was growing up in a small town, Sedalia, they had their own police force, the park department did. And so my question is, do you think there's a case to be made that being a park police or a security force for parks is justified? I know a lot of the regular police probably wouldn't like it too much, but they certainly did in Sedalia, and they ended up getting rid of them. But my question is, do you think that the park system in a municipality should have its own separate police force from the regular police?
Yes, I do. And that's a little bit qualified by how various police departments are. But I know that in the case of Boston, for example, their park ranger program was developed with the police force, so the park rangers go through training at the police academy. They have protocols for contacting the police when they need to. They don't carry weapons, but they can write citations. They're sometimes mounted on horses, which people love and which is great for kind of... The main thing is having somebody at home. Like, you don't throw a party and not be at home, right? We have these parks, generally, in most cities, and nobody's home minding the store. And so if you have a park ranger or a park police force, the important thing is that they're seen as friendly, more like a national park ranger than a police person. And that there be, it's more of a customer service, public relations, modeling, keeping an eye on things, being seen to be there, and to be helpful to people, and to be knowledgeable. Because we do have a park ranger program that started in Pittsburgh 3 years ago. The city converted several animal control positions that had been unfilled for a long time to this new job, and they took a year, I think, to write the description, but they started small, and it's been growing every year, and now the summer program is hiring young people in a learn and earn program, so they're getting it's like community policing. And I think it is a critical thing to maintain the investment.
And the regular police aren't hostile to the idea?
No,
Okay.
no. The regular police still like to drive through the park and have their lunch and sit in the shade, but they, you know,
They're okay with it?
they're okay with it, and they're highly responsive when they're needed, which isn't very often. Thank you. Yes.
Your ability to focus is stunning, I must say.
Thank you.
What, if you could pick out a single message that engages your commercial and residential stakeholders regarding funding, what would you think that would be?
Commercial and residential?
The surrounding commercial properties, you call them partners, I guess.
Yeah.
But both residents and commercial people. Is there a single message that has them contributing financially to your efforts?
Well, I would separate the business community from the residential community. I think the business community is kind of an easy answer. So outfitters, cafes, bike rentals, you know, businesses that have some relationship to recreation, obviously, they're already in. Businesses that don't are usually, if they're active in their business association, they will support their park or their park initiative. What we've been trying to do is to bring more a more dynamic relationship between the business community and an adjacent park by bringing programming in and kind of drawing connections in people's minds between what they're offered in the park, if it's, say, a food truck, and a restaurant in a nearby area. So I think the business community is just sort of targeting what the business is trying to generate in terms of traffic and position in the community, what they want to be seen as affiliated with. And parks is a really great story, and it reaches, you know, everybody. So if you're a business that wants to reach everybody, parks are a good bet. Residential, I think for most people, it is simply having this beautiful release, this space to go to where you can find solace, you can have fun, you can, you know, get to know your community, you can exercise for health. It's really all of those things, and I think each person has a different relationship. But people that are already using parks and supportive of parks aren't the people that we need to reach. The property value is an issue. Gentrification often comes up as an issue, but I think our approach is that parks stabilize property values. In some cases, yes, they boost them dramatically. But the key thing to remember there is that it's the well-maintained park that boosts property values. So, you know, it's again, it's sort of an ecology between the community of people who live around a park and use the park, understanding what their use patterns are, what needs aren't being met, meeting those needs through programming and physical improvements. I think those are the ways that you really grab more people to the cause.
We'll
Yes,
do these
yes, sir.
last two here at the microphone.
Thank you for coming. In 1960, my family took the train from Kansas City to Trenton, New Jersey, and I noticed all your parks are on the rivers, pretty close, and I was wondering if the river on fire was one of those rivers.
That's the Cuyahoga River. That's in Cleveland, which is
it's in
near where
Ohio?
I grew up.
Oh, okay, it was Ohio then instead
Yeah.
of, oh,
The
okay.
Cuyahoga.
Oh, okay, I
Yeah.
couldn't remember what state, and you know, we have the same problem here in Kansas City with the Little Blue River. And hopefully we can clean it up like they cleaned up the stuff back that way.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, Cleveland has done amazing things with their river. Just recently, I was on a parks tour there, and there's a section of river that was just awful, and now there's a restaurant next to it, and people are doing kayaking and windsurfing and all kinds of things, and it's just, and it's a Parks Department built and revenue generating facility, which is fantastic. I think that in Pittsburgh, the rivers used to be extremely polluted. Now they have bass fishing tournaments. There's lots of kayaking and water sports. So I think, generally around the country, trying to clean up the rivers is a really major effort. Riverfront trails are often a big way to stimulate that. People want to be by the water. Being by the water, especially still water, but running water too, has the greatest single health benefit of any natural environment in terms of your mental state. So, that's something. That's a real value. A lot of us are stressed, miserable, afraid, unhappy, whatever it is. But, go to the park, go to the water, and you can usually find yourself again. Yes?
A few months back, I joined a group of volunteers to clean up a homeless camp in Kessler Park. It's kind of a wild area there. What insights do you have on how we can manage homeless people using our parks in that way?
Yeah, boy, that is something that my colleague Sean Fertitta, who is our manager of visitor experience, Sean runs our facilities like Shenley Plaza and Mellon Square. In Mellon Square, because of the opioid epidemic, in the last year, there has been this huge spike in people ODing in the park. Before we renovated the park, there was a homeless population using the park a lot. There were a lot of nooks and crannies that were kind of private. And the park renovation basically stopped that. And oftentimes a project will stop a pattern, but the pattern just goes somewhere else. The pattern still exists, the need still exists, whether it's cruising for sex or cruising for drugs, or there are park inappropriate park activities that happen all over the place. I think with the homeless, what we do is we have an active relationship with the service providers in town, as well as with the mayor's office. The mayor has a special liaison for this issue. And so we meet periodically with them. We call them when we need to. We know what to do and what not to do. We don't ever push anybody out. We have really friendly relationships with some of the homeless people who frequent Shenley Plaza, and they love it there, and they're not disruptive or a negative influence. I think the answer is bringing more people into these spaces to use them in the ways that parks are meant to be used. And those other uses begin to dissipate and sometimes, really change. So again, it's knowing the people, knowing what they need, being sensitive to that, and understanding that these things, and this is the reality of our world, and our public spaces are where all that comes together, and it's messy and it's complicated, but it's worth it. It's essential to our lives.
Susan, thank you so much again.
Thank you.
This is a memorable night in a lot of ways. Thank you. And thank you for hanging with us out there.